We are live.
Okay, good evening and welcome to the Monday, April 5th work session of the Perkiomen Valley School Board. I'm going to give a couple of minutes for attendees to get into the Zoom room. Okay, item 1.01, I'm going to call the meeting to order. And 1.02, Ms. Widener, if you could take roll call, please.
Mr. Dorr?
Here.
Mrs. Evans-Brockett?
Here.
Dr. Hallis?
Here.
Dr. Kohler?
Here.
Mrs. Lofton?
Here.
Mrs. Mayers?
Here.
Mrs. Roberts?
Here.
Dr. Weston?
Here.
Ms. White?
Here.
All present.
Thank you, Ms. Widener. Item 1.03, I need a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved. Second, Wade.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Agenda is approved. Item 1.04 is a special presentation on virtual learning options, and I'll turn it over to Mrs. Smith.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're going to talk to you about some Perkiomen Valley virtual offerings that we have currently and in the future. So currently, just a quick reminder, we have virtual programming in K-12 that we are calling our virtual voyage this year due to the pandemic, where our teachers are daily providing synchronous at a scheduled time with a group of students, and it's taught by our own Perkiomen Valley teachers. We have K-5 classes in each grade level, 3 or 4 sections. They do cross sometimes the district buildings. And then in 6 to 12, those students in the virtual voyage are joining their classes via Zoom. So it's that dual delivery where teachers have some students on site and some at home. But we do have this option for all of K to 12. And then we have separately the PV Virtual School, which is that asynchronous learning environment where students are working at their own pace. It is again available K to 12 through our partnership with the Montgomery Virtual Program and other vendors that we have worked with as well. What we'd like to move towards for our future virtual programming, our goal really is to eliminate that dual teaching model where teachers have some students in front of them and some students in a virtual Zoom room at the same time. And so this really depicts, we'd like everything to fall under the umbrella of Perkiomen Valley Virtual, that really becomes our cyber school, and any options that we have available kind of fall underneath that. So we would still want to, if where feasible, continue having synchronous learning offered by our own PV teachers. We would continue to have that asynchronous learning through our partnerships with MVP or Eduseer, but we'd also like to explore asynchronous learning also taught by our own teachers to really, again, expand the opportunities to meet the needs of our students. Moving to the next slide, you can see just a reminder here, over a year ago, Mr. Stanson Marsh and I had worked to develop a mission and a vision for PV Virtual. Again, that cyber school option for students. And at that time, we were really focusing on possibly garnering back students who have gone to some external cyber charters. And we reviewed the mission and the vision and really felt like, given the pandemic and how much we have begun to use this type of learning option, it really does still fit in providing that robust digital learning opportunities, empowering our learners to really pick the model that fits best for them. The next slide then talks just a little bit about PV Virtual. We really have developed this over the past year or so to be our own cyber school option for anybody who resides within Perkiomen Valley. It is available to students in K to 12, and it's very customizable based upon whether they would like the asynchronous options or those synchronous options that we've been offering. And the added benefit is that it's a traditional PVSD education. So when we talked a year ago about bringing back students from those cyber charters, we talked about some of those benefits, which I think a few are on the next slide. It's individualized. It could be taught by PV teachers, or it could be taught by other teachers who are Pennsylvania certified. The biggest caveat here is that they maintain enrollment in Perkiomen Valley. So they have access to all of the same activities, extracurriculars, and all the benefits that come with being a PV student. They would receive our diploma at the end of their 12th grade year. And it does allow flexibility in that it's easy to return back to the brick and mortar, to our physical school building, should they choose to, or to go back into some type of virtual offering. And again, it's customizable, and we are able to offer the advanced placement options as well. So as we think about the future of, again, this PV virtual becoming the umbrella of all of the virtual offerings that we have, here are some of our ideas by level. At the elementary level, we've gotten a lot of positive feedback about those daily synchronous classes that our students have been able to participate in, and we'd like to continue to offer that. Again, depending upon our staffing and the enrollment or the number of families that might choose this option, but having our own teachers teach it, possibly having to continue crossing buildings, again, dependent upon the numbers. So very similar to what we're offering this year. We also still would have that asynchronous option. We had a few families at the elementary level participate in this, where it's taught by PA certified teachers through that partnership with MVP. And you can see I've tried to include some costs for you, as we will come back in future months with more of a definitive cost analysis between these different offerings for you to be able to consider. Next slide goes into some middle level ideas. You'll notice they're very similar to what was on the elementary slide. What I'd just like to point out here is that it may be a little bit more difficult for that option on the left, simply because of the teaming structure at the middle school and the number of students that may need to be enrolled in a synchronous virtual option for us to be able to make this work. Whether we could have a whole team of virtual students, or even possibly fit into a teacher's schedule that maybe one of the 4 periods that they teach is all of the virtual kids on their team. So if I'm a math teacher, maybe my period 2 is my virtual math, and my 20-some students there join me virtually. And then my other 3 teaching periods might be my on-site students. So more to come as we know the options that families choose, but we'd like to see if we can make that work, and then also still have that asynchronous option. And then the high school options, again, the one on the left, that daily synchronous taught by our own teachers, really will be dependent upon the number of students that enroll. It will be very difficult at the high school to schedule this because it creates a singleton, as we call it, in our scheduling, which makes it difficult to fit into students and teacher schedules all to line up. We're not ruling it out. We want to see how it might come together, but just want to be clear that that will be a bit difficult to schedule. But the 2 options on the right, then, the far right is that option that we're familiar with, the asynchronous learning through our partnership with MVP. We'd like to also explore that middle option, though, where possibly our own PV teachers would teach an asynchronous course. That way, the scheduling conflict or difficulty that we have with the option on the left is not quite as much of a barrier for us. We could actually purchase the content for the courses from MVP and then supplement it with our own PV activities and things that our teachers have found to be beneficial. We are investigating how that might be scheduled and how we might staff it, whether students could be on site at the high school and maybe have a period in their day that for them they would be learning asynchronously, or possibly they may be doing their entire schedule remotely from home. There are certainly associated costs. I'm waiting for the IU to get back to me with some ballpark figures. You can have yearly subscriptions to the courses where you can have a site license, or you can pay a per student cost. And there would be training required because you're actually using the learning management system that MVP uses, which is for most of our students through Edgenuity. So kind of like a Schoology or replacing our Google Classroom, students in these courses would have a different LMS to be using. So some creative ideas at the high school that we are exploring, and we know some districts around us have started to use this year. Lots of details to still figure out, but trying to create lots of options for our families moving forward. So some of the next steps that we're thinking about are finalizing details of those programming options so we can let our families know what is available to them for next year. Further developing our procedures and our handbooks. We learned a lot this year given the increased number of students in these programs, and we'd like to formalize that and put some process in place and in some documents, just like we have handbooks for all of our schools. We will continue to offer our credit recovery and course advancement options as we do during the summer through MVP. And we really want to make the program, everyone be more aware of that, including our administrators, our counselors, and our larger community. We'll be working on a marketing campaign with Dr. Parr using social media, different mailers, phone calls. We want to get on the phone with particularly some of our families to recruit that are out in some of the cyber charters and see if we can pull them back to come to PV Virtual. I just wanted to give you then a quick comparison of numbers and costs. So you've seen this slide before, I think from an October presentation where we compared the enrollments from October 2019 to October 2020. These are students not in our own PV Virtual, but they've chosen to they have withdrawn from Perkiomen Valley and they enrolled in one of these external cyber charters. So you can see that we have drastically increased the total number of our families that are partaking in that. So it's been a large increase. The next slide will show you some financial information for you. The cyber charter school costs for this year, so these are for students who have withdrawn from Perkiomen Valley and enrolled in another cyber charter. You can see the general ed cost is slightly over $14,000, and if the student happens to be special education, we're around $32,000 for this current school year. This shows you those costs as they have increased from the 15-16 school year through the 2021. And you'll notice every year we have seen steady increases in those costs up until this year. And because of the pandemic, there's been some cost savings there, if you want to say, and you've seen a slight decrease from last year to this particular year. The last bottom line shows you the increase or the cost for Perkiomen Virtual coursework. So for many years, we used Eduseer as our provider, and you see a cost of slightly over $3,000. And now we have transitioned almost fully to using the MVP, and you do see a higher increased cost there. However, I would point out that we have available to us a greater array of coursework, as well as it is much more rigorous and engaging in terms of what the students are participating in. But you notice that's a huge difference in the cost there if we can educate them through Perkiomen Valley Virtual than it is for them to partake in a different cyber charter. And then some more financial implications for you. These numbers, Mr. Weaver and Mrs. Hurd were able to provide to us to give you an idea of how our charter school tuition rates have increased, as you can see, over the years and what we are estimating in 2021, as well as what we've spent in tuition costs for Perkiomen Valley Virtual, meaning what we've paid to Eduseer, what we've paid to MVP across the years. And you do see, slight increases as we've gone, and then a very large increase this particular year as we've had an increase in the PV Virtual students. You also see staffing and benefits across the years, and you'll notice a sharp decline into 1920. And that was because in the past, we had a full-time staff member associated with the classroom at the high school, where many of our high school students choose to physically come into school, but partake in their PV Virtual asynchronous classes in the school building. Last year in the 1920 year, we only had a part-time person in that role, and then we covered the rest of it with duties of our teachers. And we really didn't find that to be very beneficial with the programming and supporting our students. And so this year we are back to having somebody in that classroom. And so that's some of the changes there. So you can see the total. If you compare the orange to the orange, you can see the amounts that we have been spending and that comparison. Any thoughts or questions on what our thoughts are for moving forward with PV Virtual? I see Mrs. Lofton.
Thank you, Lori. So I do have a question regarding our timelines for decision-making around what we're going to be offering and how that will impact our staffing decisions. So I'm assuming that we need to decide this as part of our budget process of what we're going to offer. And then I guess my question is, when are we going to be asking our families to be signing up, and sort of how are we going to make sure we have the right number of pieces in the right places to support everything from a budget, just as we're looking through our staffing and budgetary needs?
Good question. We are hopeful that within the elementary program, that with our current staffing and knowing that we have declining enrollments, that we would be able to staff these synchronous classes like we did this year with our current staffing that we have. Secondary is certainly a different beast. The asynchronous is a little bit easier. as we contract with that third-party MVP. If we use our own teachers, we have gotten some information from Springford. They created an MOU with their union to be creative about how they might compensate a teacher if it doesn't fit into their teaching schedule. So it certainly has impacts. I'm going to defer, Dr. Russell, if you want to talk at all about timelines that we're thinking about. We've started to talk about, what next year might look like.
Yeah, I think it's an extremely important question at this point, and the timing is critical as our principals begin to build master schedules. So we wanted to get the conversation out to the board this month, and hopefully we'll be able to make a decision next month. Even if we wait as late as June, it becomes very difficult to schedule students in the choices that they would like. A lot of that master scheduling starts in May. So ideally, if we can make a decision by the second week in May, I think that will serve us well. The other challenge for us is the uncertainty around the pandemic and the conditions, the circumstances under which we will be operating schools. So those are two really overarching questions to think about, and timing, but we wanted to get the conversation started sooner rather than later. We hope that by mid-May, we can have a plan and be able to offer this option to our families. Right now, at this point in time, we have heard from enough families that we believe we should be in a position to offer a virtual option to families as well as an on-site option, really trying to work diligently to avoid that dual delivery model. That's been really challenging, not only for staff, but for our students too.
So, and then if I can follow up on that question, then, for example, at the high school, depending on the numbers, could you, knowing that we have 30 sections of Spanish, could there be virtual sections of Spanish? Could there be a virtual section of, ninth grade? What is it that they typically do? Yeah, the ninth grade social studies. Some of the more popular classes, could those be individual sections created that could fit into students' schedules if possible, and then have those be recorded and have people be able to either participate synchronously or asynchronously depending on their needs?
That is absolutely a possibility. The challenge is if I'm a ninth grade student and I want virtual social studies, and maybe I'm one of 25% of ninth graders who desire this, it becomes difficult to schedule a teacher who typically delivers 5 courses with one virtual section, and for that one virtual section in that ninth grade schedule to be able to accommodate the interested ninth graders. It would depend on a couple of different variables. How many teachers you would have available with a course slot open to deliver virtual, and how many students would be interested. So as Mrs. Smith mentioned, it can create a singleton in someone's schedule. So that means if Barb Russell is teaching social studies and one of them has to be virtual, all the virtual interested students have to fit in that period 3 or that identified period, that singleton, if you will, which can really make the master scheduling more challenging. But we're thinking about that now. Those are the sorts of questions we're starting to toss around as Dr. Moss and the principals are gathering data about what students want to take next year and how things may play out.
Great, thank you. So I'm assuming then we can approve the plan and then some of that more granular detail gets worked out as the schedules are finalized over the summer.
Yes, that would be our goal, to present to you a way to offer virtual options to our secondary level students. Right now, we believe we will have the staffing to do it in the same manner we are offering it currently at the elementary level. We want to work out some of the ideas, tease them out at the secondary level, and fine tune that plan for you to approve by second week in May, ideally.
Dr. Weston?
Yeah, thank you. A couple just comments, really, more than questions. First of all, thanks for the presentation. I thought that was a very very interesting, very informative presentation. With regard to the increase in charter school external to PV, the 122% increase in charter school enrollment outside of PV over the last year, that's really striking. And something I'd like to hear more about in the weeks to come is kind of the marketing efforts, if you will. Sometimes marketing has a negative connotation, but I don't mean it in that sense. I want to know how we're going to get a lot of these students back. PV, I want PV to be the first choice for the students in this community for their education, and I'd really like to know more about how we're planning to attract them back in to PV. I think that's just better all around. And then also, a comment with regard to the difference in costing. That's certainly striking as well. And I'm just wondering, probably a topic for a different presentation. I'd like to hear more about how the discussions are going in Harrisburg over charter funding formulas and how that can be made more equitable for schools like PV Virtual, and then for external charter schools. That's something I'd like to hear more about in the future as well.
Thank you, Dr. Weston. We can certainly put some of that together when we have our marketing plan fleshed out a little bit more. We can bring all that back to you prior to the May board meetings. Ms. White?
Laura, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Okay,
Yes.
that's what this does. Okay, my question is, with regards to the offering for the fall, it comes back to very different circumstances and challenges from secondary to elementary. So for secondary, acknowledgement of all of the challenges Dr. Russell just described, then some. Those kids that may elect virtual will still have an opportunity for on-site activities via clubs and sports and things like that. And there's less mixture between schools for that secondary level of education because that exists just by circumstance. At the elementary level, theoretically, we could have just perhaps one section of first grade be virtual, and that would be a mix of all of the elementary schools, I'm assuming, with one designated teacher, similar to the format that it is now. What kind of conversations have happened with regard to offering these virtual families that may elect this path at the elementary level in the future for on-site engagement and socialization within their home buildings, and kind of furthering and fixing some of the disjointed experience that virtual families have had, this year? Understanding that this year was completely irregular to begin with, should families elect to continue this style, this mode of teaching for the fall, what can be done to create more equality for the elementary experience?
Yeah, good point, Ms. White. And we certainly have learned this year, as we've brought kids together across the 4 elementary buildings, about areas that we want to improve in terms of the consistency of the experience or the activities. And, unfortunately, the pandemic really didn't allow us to do a lot of promotion with our virtual families about activities and things they could get involved in because we were limiting those. That's certainly an area, though, that I think as we move forward with PV Virtual, we want to be able to have communication efforts with our families. This event is going on, come and join us, or you can join virtually. So I think definitely an area we want to continue to pursue and amp up and continue to have the conversations about what does learning look like across all buildings in a particular grade level. I see Ms. McGovern.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I just had a quick question. Mrs. Lofton and Dr. Russell were kind of talking about if you have an excessive amount of students wanting to be in one class and the difficulty in planning that. But I was wondering if we were aware of what to do if we have the opposite. Just from my personal experience with classes this year, when we switch to the traditional mode, we usually have like 5 to 10 at most students who are virtual. So if we weren't able to fill a class size with how many students want to be virtual, what would we do in that situation?
Yeah, good question, Maggie. And that's why we really want to explore that middle option that we had on the high school screen. We have certainly learned that the asynchronous option is an advantage for some families, but we'd like it to be taught by our own PV teachers. There's just a different level of connection, right? When it's your own Perkiomen Valley teacher. And so if we aren't able to fill a section, as Ms. Mcgovern explained, we may need to think about that option of having asynchronous learning that still a PV teacher could oversee. And we've got the content for them and the learning management system for them, but maybe that's an asynchronous time for the students to be working. And maybe we can build in a once a week where there's a synchronous connection. So kind of trying to marry the two and have an offering that brings maybe the best of both. So Maggie, that'll come more as we figure out the number of students that are looking at these options and what courses they want to be involved in. And some students, particularly at the high school, maybe we can have a virtual synchronous math class, but it's an asynchronous, different class in social studies because of the numbers. So they might be in kind of a mixed mode of these virtual offerings, depending upon which ones we can schedule in which ways.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Anybody else from the board have questions or thoughts? Well, thank you for the time tonight. I have taken some notes and we will bring back more information over the course of the next month and present further details in May. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Moving on to section 1.05, comments on any topic. We'll accept public comments on this at this time. We accept public comments from district residents or employees, and just ask that you raise your hand in the Zoom room if you'd like to make a comment. And before presenting your comment, please state your name and your municipality. And all comments will be limited to 3 minutes. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ganesh to allow comments.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. Mrs. McGinn.
Hello, this is Dianna McGinn from Perkiomen Township. I just wanted to extend my sincere thank you to the administrative team, Mrs. Smith, and of course the board for considering this option as an ongoing need, not just for pandemic response next year, but also because there are so many students who are in cyber situations who I have always felt as somebody who temporarily worked in a cyber school really could have their needs met by their home districts if such an arrangement was extended. So I just want to thank you because I know the effort that goes into running two parallel endeavors. Obviously, there's been so many efforts put forward with what is being offered in person with all the extra red tape of the pandemic. So, just want to thank you and also, say that if there's ever any need for parent participation, I'm somebody who would always be willing to volunteer my time with this endeavor. But thank you. And I appreciate that there's an obvious recognition that our virtual teachers at the elementary level have just done an outstanding job despite the circumstances. Obviously, if it was meant to be temporary, but I think they really knocked it out of the park. And I just want to extend a thanks to them as well. Thank you.
Daniel.
Yes, hi. My name is Daniel Gerhab, Perkiomen Township. Later on in the agenda, there is a vote to approve an anti-Asian hate statement, and I just wanted to give a little personal feedback on that. So I grew up about an hour north of here in a smaller town in a very little diverse school district, and I kind of grew up with pretty much being ignorant that racism existed out there, at least in my town. I mean, I knew that it existed in, bigger cities, but I didn't really feel like being a young white male that I really saw anything going on. But without that diversity, it's kind of hard to see. And anyway, fast forward to today. I have a wonderful wife who's from Korea and two lovely boys that are half Asian. And I've seen a lot of racism, even in our community. Whether it be through racial slurs or through, I mean, my wife was at a supermarket, at a local supermarket giant, and some stranger just came up to her and said, go back to your country, you don't belong here, for no reason. My kids, they see it too, whether it be innocent or not. My son's been made fun of through slanted eyes or through the food he's been brought to in the classroom. And anyway, I just wanted to say that it does exist even in our community, and I hope that our PV school stands behind the statement they bring out, and hopefully it gets approved, and we can fight for the minorities that are here. Thank you.
No more public comments.
Thank you, Mr. Ganesh. We will move on to section 2, reports. Item 2.01, the student liaisons report. Ms. McGovern and Mr. Smith, you have a report for us tonight?
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to quickly share that the students are coming off of spring break tomorrow at the secondary level. We will be back in school. I think things are moving pretty smoothly and regularly. There are a lot of things going on for seniors at this time that the high school has been trying to plan, including prom, a trip to Hershey, and things like that. So there are a lot of exciting things, hopefully, that we'll be able to safely execute for the seniors this year. Thank you.
I don't have anything else to report tonight.
Okay, thank you both. Moving on to item 2.02, the President's Report. I just wanted to say that the Pennsylvania School Board Association, better known as PSBA, held their Advocacy Day on March 22nd. There were over 200 attendees from across the state, and about 120 Zoom meetings were scheduled with legislators. Ms. White and I were able to attend, and we met with Senator Muth, Representative Cerisi, Representative Webster, and Senator Mensch. The focus of this year's Advocacy Day was on charter reform, mandate waivers, and systemic budget and funding issues. And I thank Mr. Weston for asking about charter reform earlier. Charter reform has been talked about for years in Pennsylvania, but it really seems to have legs this year. And a bill introduced by Representative Cerisi has a lot of bipartisan support. And this bill would reduce regular ed payments to a standard $9,500 per student, as compared to our over $14,000 that Mrs. Smith had pointed out earlier. And special education would be charged on a tier system. Right now, we pay the $32,000 for a student, even if they're only receiving speech services once a week. If they're considered special ed for any reason, they get the entire $32,000. So this bill would help put that on a tier system. Fortunately, all of our representatives and senators seem to be in support of this, and there's more of an issue in the central and western part of the state. So if you have friends that live in those areas, please encourage them to reach out to their legislators. And that's all I have for tonight. That brings us on to section 2.03 and the Superintendent's Report. Dr. Russell.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. And this evening, I would like to touch upon just a few of the experiences of our students at this point. So this evening's presentation is void of anything to do with COVID and considerations for our school schedules, which has been a lot of the conversation up until recent weeks. So this evening, I just want to take a few minutes and showcase some of the great things that are happening on the part of our students and with our students. And I'll start with robotics and then move on to some of the opportunities for our special education students. So we have a robotics team, and they're right now in the process of competing. The competition looks different this year. It's very virtual in nature. However, it's also extremely sophisticated, and what our students need to do is pretty neat. So I'll share with you a very brief video, and I have some other video links in here for you to get a sense of what our students do. They actually build a robot, and the robot this year must be able to toss a ball in between a large circle that then has a smaller circle within it. And they have 9 different skill challenges that the robot must meet. Very impressive work. So those are some of the members of our robotics team. And, you know, if you watch some of these clips, it's pretty impressive what our students have built and what this robot can do. So kudos to them. They continue in their process of competing with area teams, and lots of nice clips for you to take a look at if you're interested. And I'll keep you updated, and maybe we will even bring our students and the robot before you prior to the end of the school year. So great work, and a wonderful club to have added to our high school. So the other point I want to make is really around some of the inclusive work that we're doing and the ways that we are cultivating inclusive school communities. That's our mission. It's read at every board meeting and is something that we in the district think about. So there is a brief video here for you to watch at some point, really around co-teaching. And co-teaching is one way to support students that are identified as special needs being a part of the regular ed classrooms. And this is about 7 minutes, so I won't show it tonight, but the link is here, and I encourage you to take a look at it if you haven't. It will also be available to the public. But some wonderful work that is developing elementary level, middle level, as well as at the high school. This happens to be a high school teacher. Oops. The other call out that I'd like to share, or something I'd like to showcase, is the introduction and implementation, the startup of unified sports this spring. And that was really an exciting step for our district to take. We had lots of wonderful encouragement by some key parents in our district and support from some key staff. And what unified sports is that it is a PIAA team that is comprised of, it consists of regular education students working with intellectually disabled students on the same team. We've implemented or started up a track and field team. Students started practice the week of March 22nd, along with all other spring sports. So very excited to have this team get off the ground, if you will, and again, provide opportunities for inclusive experiences to our students. So stay tuned. We will have a home meet at some point on our track. And if you get a chance to be out and about on some of these beautiful days, great to see. These are just some more pictures of some of our students that are participating in the unified sports on the track and field team. And lastly, I want to mention that, again, in our efforts to really strengthen the inclusive experiences of, in particular, our special education students, Dr. Boyd is going to host some special education roundtable conversations. The first one is tomorrow night. in her efforts to engage parents, she's really interested in giving them a brief overview and then also entertaining their questions. What is it they want to know more about? What is it we can do to facilitate greater connections and stronger inclusive experiences for students? There will be a follow-up roundtable scheduled in April that will focus specifically on compensatory services. So just a shout out to our special education department and hosting these roundtables, hoping that we're able to connect with lots of families and address questions that they may have. And with that, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Russell. That takes us on to item 2.04, the Solicitor's Report. Mr. Subers, do you have anything to report tonight?
I do not have anything to report.
Thank you. Item 2.05, Board and District Committee Reports. Board members actively participate in the following committees. Available minutes and notes of committee activities are included in the agenda item following the chart. Does any board member have anything from a committee that they attended that they'd like to share tonight? Seeing none, we'll move on to section 3. Item 3.01 is the consent agenda for the business meeting. Items that represent standard routine business of the board are included in the consent agenda. Board members may request to have any items removed for discussion. The consent agendas as of April 5th, 2021 are listed below. Additional items may be added to the consent agenda during tonight's meeting. And I'll let you read which ones are the standard ones from personnel items. And that will move us on to section 4 on education, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Kolar.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. Item 4.01 is an education update, so we'll turn it back over to Mrs. Smith.
Thank you, Dr. Kolar. This evening's education update really has 2 pieces to it. The first being just an update on our assessment plans for PSSA and Keystone exams, and then secondly, our enrollment and staffing projections. So starting with the PSSA and Keystone plans, Pennsylvania is maintaining the testing requirements for the 2021 school year, which requires us to assess our students in grades 3 to 8 in both ELA and mathematics, and in grades 4 and 8 in science, as well as to administer the end of course assessment, the Keystone exam in Algebra 1, biology, and literature. They have, however, extended the testing window for the PSSAs so that we may choose really when fits best for us and be able to accommodate small groups and our health and safety plan. So we actually have through September 30th. Many of the districts across the county have been talking about this extension, and I'm not aware of any district that is actually choosing to extend into the fall. Most of us have determined that still assessing, since we need to do them, this spring would be most advantageous and not waiting until after the summer. But we have pushed back from the original dates that were planned, and we will be now assessing the PSSAs in early May from the 4th to the 14th. And Keystone's at the middle level, we will be assessing May 25th to 26th, which is within the Keystone window. The high school is still to be determined. I'll talk in a moment about some ideas we are thinking about there. The other piece of the assessments this year is, although we still are required to administer the assessments, there has been a waiver of the 95% participation rate requirement, which usually counts towards our Future Ready Index. This has been waived for this year as the state is recognizing and understanding that some families may not be comfortable depending upon their instructional mode in terms of the assessments, or that we may not be able to assess everybody due to our health and safety plans. They do still, however, indicate that the only acceptable reason through the Pennsylvania Department of Education to request exclusion remains the religious beliefs, if there's a conflict with your religious beliefs. The next slide will show you, Dr. Russell, if we could go to the next slide. Oh, you did. I'm sorry. It looked the same to me. I apologize. So for the assessments, we are assessing all students. They must take it on site to maintain test security. So we will be scheduling times when our virtual students will need to join us in our school buildings and join a testing group to take those assessments. We are, however, changing to online delivery of the assessment. And this is something for many years schools have talked about, and we weren't in a position to do so because we were not one-to-one. We didn't have sufficient devices. We do this year, and given health and safety and the distribution of all of the materials, as well as our ability now to have Chromebooks for everybody, we feel like this is the perfect time for us to try the online delivery of the assessment, which means we won't be passing out paper pencil booklets. Students will receive test tickets where they log into the DRC website and they are then administer their test completely online. We will still have the paper pencil assessments available if there are individual students that, due to their needs, need to take it or will perform best, most comfortable on paper pencil. We will still adhere to our health and safety plan. So really the small groups that we have in place for our classrooms are very similar to what we would have done for PSSA testing in the past. So we'll continue with that. We have mandated training that is required every year to be a test administrator. We will continue with that, as well as ensure that our staff are prepared to administer the test online. And our K-8 buildings are developing building schedules within those dates of May 4th to the 14th, and of course, grouping the students for testing as we do every year. The Keystone exams then at the high school pose a bit of a difficulty in terms of the number of students that typically take this test every year and how best to schedule those given the health and safety plan, as well as our different modes of instruction this year. So we have 3 options for consideration here. We are certainly interested in feedback from our board. Similar to past years, what we typically do is we run a Keystone schedule while the rest of the building is still receiving their classes. So students taking the Keystone miss the classes that they would partake in. They would take 1 module per day. Each of the Keystones has 2 modules. So it takes 2 days to complete 1 Keystone exam. This will be very difficult this year, given COVID conditions and having enough teachers to proctor the actual Keystone exams with those small number of students in small groups and still run a synchronous schedule with all of our on-site students. So we have started to think about the logistics of, do we test in large group spaces like in the cafeteria or in any of the high school spaces, the gymnasiums, and minimize the number of test administrators needed, that we have fewer teachers needing to administer the test, but a larger number of students spread out in a large space. In order to do that, given our space restrictions and the number of students taking 1 test per day or 1 module, would actually require us to have 10 days of testing and disruption to the school schedule. Given the number of students that can fit in a space like the cafeteria, we would actually need to have 2 large groups for biology, 2 large groups for literature, and algebra could fit 1. And then each of those large groups has 2 tests that they need to take. That's where the 10 days comes from. So we are also finally considering, might it be most beneficial in terms of disruption to the school schedule and loss of instructional time to plan asynchronous learning days, 1 day for each Keystone, which means 3 total days. Any test takers would come into school, they would take module 1 in the morning, they would have lunch, they would take module 2 in the afternoon and be completely done with their assessments, within that 1 day for each Keystone they may need to take. If we're able to, we would love to be able to offer or consider synchronous learning for some students if it's possible. For example, the literature exam is typically taken at the end of the 10th grade English course. So those students, could we possibly have synchronous learning for the 9th and the 11th graders? Our seniors are in career study at this time and not in classes regardless. So trying to see, can we make something work? The difficulty is those classes that are cross grade level, which are many of the classes at the high school. But 3 pieces that we are looking at in terms of those high school Keystones, and really just trying to figure out which one will best meet the needs of all of our students and not impact the instructional time that we have left as significantly. Are there any thoughts on this topic from the board before I move on to enrollment? Mrs. Lofton?
So I really do have mixed feelings about this. I'm not sure that the asynchronous learning days are particularly effective for learning. However, that does seem to be the most efficient and effective way to integrate this with the least disruption. So, you know, I think I would lean towards doing that over having 10 days of disruption, especially with all the health and safety considerations that need to be in place. I think that what you have laid out under number 3 here makes the most sense just from a practicality standpoint.
Thank you for the feedback, Mrs. Lofton. Anyone else? Okay, then I will roll into enrollment projections for both our students and our staff. Just want to note that this month's enrollment report, which you'll see next in the agenda, is slightly different because it is the first month that we are reporting with our students or more of our students back on site. So on the elementary side, you will no longer see the AM and PM sections broken out separately, except for kindergarten. You'll continue to see it there, but the others have been combined so that you actually see the number of students that are in a classroom at any given time. And on the secondary report, you will notice a significant decrease in the number of students who were enrolled in the virtual voyage from March of 2021 to the April report that you are seeing. Those numbers have dropped significantly because more students came back on site. So just wanted to point that out about this month's reports. Looking at our projections then, these slides will look relatively the same. I've updated the numbers based upon the April enrollments. I know this one is tough to see. The bottom line there in the green is really the place to look. All of our enrollment numbers, given the staffing, fit within our policy guidelines for class size. And we should still feel, due to the decrease in enrollment, a decrease of 2.5 staff members possibly here at the elementary level. Remember, one of those staff members was a temporary 1-year assignment due to our virtual classes. So we actually net 1.5 staff members possibly out of the elementary. We are continuing to keep our eye on the kindergarten numbers. And for our May report, I will have for you the actual registrations that we are realizing in each of our buildings for our kindergarten registrations and see how close they come to what we were projecting. So might still see some movement there. This slide has the middle school enrollments on it for you. You'll notice we are still projecting a decrease of 2 staff members out of middle school east. And that is mainly because of a decrease in 7th grade from 250 students to 215 next year. However, you'll also notice that the 7th grade in both buildings is the highest class size. It is still within our class size guidelines of 25 to 30. So right now we're still projecting a decrease of 2 there, but we're going to keep our eye on particularly that 7th grade level here at both of the middle schools. And then our high school projections look relatively similar from last month. We are not at this point projecting any additional staff here. But again, as the high school schedule comes together and we see what those course requests are, we will certainly bring forth anything, but not projecting anything at this point. So in summary, we've been talking a lot about different positions, and you'll see some items on the agenda this evening for approval this month by the school board. We have prioritized the positions that we've been requesting into the following categories. First and foremost, our special education needs. Dr. Boyd has presented to you many times on these needs and looking at the rosters and caseloads of our teachers and the needs that we have. So 2 special education teachers right now slotted for the high school, and that board certified behavior analyst are our first priorities. The second priority being supporting teaching and learning through the implementation or use of an instructional coach to really have job embedded professional development for our staff. And then our third priority at this point is health and wellness, focusing on the elementary health and wellness that you recently approved that increase dependent upon the staffing. And we believe, based upon that decrease in enrollment at the elementary that we just talked about, that we can reallocate that from within. We are at this point, you'll notice we have removed the middle school health and wellness from this priority list. And that was talked about at our education committee, that we are going to embed that currently into our physical education in 6th, 7th, and 8th, and use this year to really develop further what that curriculum could look like to bring that forth possibly in another year. So the next slide is really that summary chart. You can see the positions that we are projecting to change based upon enrollment. In the left is a total of 3.5 positions due to that declining enrollment. And then the positions on the right are the requests that we have made to this point. I do still have that autistic support position kind of hanging in there just in case, based upon our early intervention meetings. And so you'll notice that we have a request for potentially 7, 3.5 of which we can get through our enrollments declining. So it's an add of 3.5 positions. And in Mr. Weaver's presentations for budget development, he has included 6 professional staff positions in his budget presentation. So currently we are within that. And the last piece here is Mr. Ganesh has presented in both the Education Committee and the Finance Committee regarding a tech repair position, which would be in addition to his department staff, focusing primarily on the support of our Chromebook inventory, as that has again drastically increased and moved along our one-to-one much quicker than we had anticipated in a positive way. And you can notice in the chart below that the cost for that person is really a rearrangement of costs that we currently experience for the accidental protection and different services for the Chromebooks. I don't know, Mr. Ganesh, if you want to add anything to that.
No, Mrs. Smith. I think the chart explains that this is not going to be an add to the budget. It's just going to be a transfer of funds. And I'll be happy to answer any questions if the board has any.
Thank you, Mr. Ganesh. And I believe that is it for the enrollment and staffing. But are there any thoughts or questions for either Mr. Ganesh or I? Ms. White?
I do have one quick question about the IT position, the repair position. And maybe I just am misunderstanding. When this position was discussed during the Education Committee, I interpreted this for to be like a teaching position that also did tech repairs. Is this something different than that?
So I think, go ahead, Mr. Ganesh. I see you're unmuting.
Right. So to clarify, the primary purpose for this position is to do the tech repairs. And also, we're looking for a person who has some kind of teaching or coaching abilities to kind of help the students who are going to be taking this course. But the primary purpose of this for this person is to make sure that we're able to service those 5,000 Chromebooks that we have in the district.
But this will be a class, an elective class that students can take. Is that correct?
That is correct. And the teacher on record is going to be, I think at this point, it's still evolving. It's going to be Mr. Pennybacker. And this person would actually work with Mr. Pennybacker to kind of offer the courses and also to perform repairs.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Mayers?
Thank you. To continue on with Ms. White's question, I also had a question. So then is esports, because I also was in Education Committee and that was talked about a lot as being part of the class, and now that will be no more. Is that correct? I'm just a little confused at the shift that it seems like from what we talked about in education to what's being presented. I'm just trying to understand it.
So the Viking Genius Bar course itself, it has several offerings. One of them is the hands-on repair, like more like a Geek Squad from Best Buy. There are other areas that the course will focus on, and one of the focus areas is the esports. This being the year one for this course, I'm not sure how much further or how much deeper we can get into each of those categories, but the goal is to kind of using this course to venture upon these upcoming and the next generation technologies, including esports.
Then I have one more question for Mrs. Smith, just a comment, I guess. When we're talking about asynchronous days, I do think I like that I'm seeing that you're trying to possibly have more students in the school. I do think asynchronous days for a lot of students who have a lot of needs, they're totally dependent on student willingness, students' ability to access what's being asked of them, and then parent or some other involvement to make sure that the student can be on task. So I am hopeful that students who have a lot of needs might be able to find their way into the school on those asynchronous days. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Maris. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Moving on to item 4.02, the enrollment report. If we could project that on the screen. And then Mrs. Smith, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything to that, or Dr. Russell, if you wanted to point anything out.
I don't have anything to point out except for the two items that I had mentioned in the updates, just the changes that you'll see.
Mrs. Lofton, do you have a question?
Yeah, so, as we're looking at this, I'm just wondering if the numbers that we're being presented with and the numbers that we looked at when you were showing us the projections for next year, are projections for next year, assuming that we bring back any percentage of the students who left us for charter schools this year, or are they assuming that all of the students will remain in the charter schools? Mrs. Smith, I think you're still on mute.
Thanks.
Thank you.
The way that the projections have been done are based upon students currently enrolled in PV. So I've not added any students back in that have withdrawn and are partaking in an external cyber school, but we have included all of those students that are currently in PV Virtual or Virtual Voyage 2.0. It's really hard to predict if we're going to be able to garner some of those students back. Certainly something for us to think about, though, as we continue to market towards that. Might that change these? Just remember, the enrollment projections were also done by comparing October 2019, October 2020, and current enrollment. And then we took the highest of those projections because we weren't sure, we had students that decided to homeschool this year, or they withdrew and went somewhere else. And of course, we're hoping that they will come back to us. So we didn't want to cut ourselves short by using just maybe our current enrollment. So if it was higher in October of 19 or 20, we used that.
Right, exactly. And that's my concern, is if we do have some of those students who hopefully the pandemic will continue to abate and we'll be able to have more in person, and more people who went to virtual cyber charters will be interested in returning to PV. And that's where, especially at the middle school, it doesn't look like we have a lot of cushion for the two positions that we've removed. So I guess that's the one where I'm a little bit nervous about attritioning those two positions, or shifting, or whatever it is that we're doing with them.
Yeah, I think we'll need to continue to monitor very carefully over the next couple of months.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions on the enrollment report? Right, moving on to section 4.03. The motion will be to approve online credits from EduSeer or Montgomery Virtual Program MVP combined with affirmation of participation in regularly scheduled advising sessions with the PV instructor as fulfillment of credit recovery requirements of PVSD 2021 Secondary Summer School. Are there any comments or questions? Okay, can we move that to consent? Item 4.04, the motion will be to approve the proposed allocations for the ESSER2 elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds as presented. And it looks like $410,000 for Chromebooks, $75,722 for technology, $340,000 for summer programming, and $46,168 for air purifiers. Any comments or questions? Okay, can we move that to consent? Item 4.05, the motion will be to purchase Vista Higher Learning Duckworth as the French 2 to 5 resource in the amount of $38,989.43 as recommended by the Education Committee. Any comments or questions? Okay, so can we also move that to consent? Item 4.06, the motion will be the approval of agreement with Penn State University Lehigh Valley Writing Project to provide weekly summer enrichment camps for elementary students during the weeks of July 12th, 19th, and 26th, 2021, Monday through Thursday, at a cost of $14,760 and as recommended by the Education Committee. Any comments or questions? Okay, so let's move that one to consent as well. Item 4.07, the motion will be to approve the Athletic Health and Safety Plan version 9 for the 2020-2021 school year as presented. So the revisions are in red, I believe. Dr. Russell, did you have anything you wanted to point out?
Couple of things. There are some adjustments for our student athletes during spring sports. I know that Mr. Felty is also on the line this evening if there are more specific questions, but boys lacrosse will not be wearing masks or not obligated to wear masks because their helmets have shields, face shields, and the goalie on the girls' team will also be exempt. When students are not playing, they are still expected to maintain that 6 feet of social distancing. We are also allowing our students to use the locker rooms, however, with oversight and emphasis on social distancing as they get ready for sports. We continue to encourage our students to conduct that daily symptom monitoring. That's really critical for all of our students. And also wanted to mention that the spectator and indoor percentages based on total capacities have adjusted as of yesterday per the governor's order, so that outside we are able to host up to 50% of the maximum occupancy in any of our venues. However, once again, individuals attending any of our fields in any of our venues will be expected to wear masks and maintain that social distancing. I don't know if there are other additional questions on the part of the board. As I mentioned, Mr. Felty is here this evening and can address anything more specific.
I'm not seeing any hands. Are we comfortable moving this item to consent? Okay, we'll move 4.07 to consent, please. Item 4.08. If you could adjust the screen, Dr. Russell, so I can read it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. There we go. Item 4.08, the motion will be to approve the Health and Safety Plan version 17 for the 2020-21 school year as presented. Again, revisions are noted in red. Dr. Russell, did you want to explain anything?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Kolar. So some of the same aspects are a part of the revisions here in this plan, as I just mentioned for the athletics plan, with one addition. There is a request on the part of high school administration and our physical education department to reinstitute swimming. It does provide another station during phys ed class. Now that our students are back in, many of them attending on site, it allows our teachers to maintain a level of social distancing and smaller groupings. So if the board can be comfortable, this is part of the proposed revisions in the health and safety plan.
Any comments or questions on this change? Ms. White?
Should a family elect to not participate in a reinstated swing program, will there be any, I guess, downside to them, to that student? Will it, in a negative way?
Interesting question. Our students, if swimming is reinstituted, if you will, there are credit requirements for our students. However, during this pandemic, our administration and our teachers have tried to be really empathetic to concerns. I'm certain they will engage in conversation and talk through any extenuating circumstances or requests and work with families to try and accommodate.
Okay, I'm
sorry,
Go ahead.
it took me a second to unmute. So I guess just to follow up on that, does something need to be documented along those lines to allow for families to opt out of swimming? Should it be reinstated as part of the health and safety plan, or how will that be monitored?
I would suggest that if a family has some questions about that, they should contact their child's house principal at the high school and start there. Or even prior to that, touch base with the teacher. And again, students do have opportunities to acquire that credit for swimming in other years of high school. So there are ways that we can work with our families. Start with the teacher and then move to the house principal if necessary for that discussion.
Okay, I don't see any other comments or questions. Are we comfortable moving this to consent, or does anybody want to leave it off consent? Okay, let's move 4.08 to consent then. Item 4.09, the motion will be to approve the attached addendum to the 2020-2021 student handbooks. We could see that on the screen, Dr. Russell. So Dr. Russell, I don't know if you want to explain, but it looks like this is to exempt high school students from final exams during this school year.
Yes, thanks again, Dr. Kolar. So the recommendation on the part of high school administration is to relieve our students of final exams this year. And that would impact the grading process for our students. Typically, final exams contribute 10% to the final grade. So their final grades would be based on marking period averages alone, were the board to approve this shift. And it's just one small thing that they believe will go a long way in relieving students. For some, the learning has been easier this year than for others. So this is a way to accommodate students.
Any comments or questions from the board? Okay, I don't see any. So if we could also move this item to consent, please. And I believe that concludes my section.
Thank you, Dr. Kolar. That brings us to section 5 on business, and Mr. Dorr, please.
Thank you, Ms. Stebbins-Brockett. Section 5.01, Finance Update, Mr. Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Dorr. Good evening, everybody. We have a presentation to move forward tonight for the finance update. There's the agenda. We'll talk a little bit about use of available fund balances and balance reserves associated with the solution for 2021-2022 general fund budget. We'll talk real quick about the operations fleet needs and focus in on the cost benefit analysis of a lease versus purchase. And then we'll have some quick hitters at the very end just to inform the board of some financial areas that we're moving forward. So the next slide, just as a reminder, every year the school district and the school board get together with district administration and we work at what are our available reserves to help offset future increases in costs and tax increases associated with where we're at with our budget process. Typically, this is when we start that process. And the focus really becomes focused upon projections and where we're at, the amounts of unassigned fund balances and reserves, and in this particular year, also COVID reserve funds that we have available to us to utilize as part of our solution to the budget for 21-22. And just a note, we've already worked our way through the process of the use of debt service fund balance and PSAT's committed balances as part of as the earlier part of a budgetary process as well. So The next slide talks specifically about the unassigned fund balance. Just as a reminder, the general purpose financial statements as audited as of June 30, 2020 had our fund balance at unassigned fund balance at $9,013,162, which is 8% by law. And we went through that process, and that is an audited budget figure. So we take that number and we move that forward with relative assuredness and confidence that that number is exactly where we're at. There is a significant portion of that will pertain to our projection, and we're going to work on our projection over the next couple of meetings. But for now, we know that we have an unassigned fund balance audited figure of $9 million. It's a very high level of confidence that with some additional savings that we've had about over 30 days where we have not provided bus transportation due to the pandemic. We do know that we'll have savings, so to speak, that offset some of the additional costs. So Mrs. Hurd and I continue to work on those numbers. So we have a very high confidence level that that $9 million figure will be available for us to use. As part of a discussion process, just to kickstart the conversation, the administration is recommending the use of unassigned fund balance of $1.5 million. This is the same figure that we utilized to offset the 2020-2021 current year budget as a process, strategic process to help us facilitate a tax increase lower than the Act 1 index strategically. So moving forward, the other discussion point is the COVID reserve. We do know, obviously, I'm not going to regurgitate that, but the COVID reserve was created by savings associated with the 1920 school year. It's been well documented. This is an audited figure of 2.894. And so unaudited figure, our best guesstimate at this point in time is about 2.5 million we should have available to us. As part of that conversation, I'd like to offer up that the administration recommends use of $500,000 of that $2.5 million to help for the creation of the 2021-2022 budget as well. All combined, that would be a $2 million recommendation based upon the availability of the numbers that we have. I would offer that up for discussion. We feel confident in that from a business perspective, that those two figures are good numbers to start with as we work our way through the end of our budget process for 21-22. We do plan on talking about this more in the Finance Committee, but I at least wanted to get it out to the full school board as well to let you know that these conversations are happening moving forward. I don't expect a lot of discussion, but if you have any questions now, that would be great. If not, we'll talk more about it in the Finance Committee. Thank you. I think that these are solid numbers to start with.
Mr. Weaver,
yes.
Mrs. Lofton has her hand raised.
Yes, Mrs. Lofton.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Thank you, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. I'm just curious with the use of, I guess it looks like $2 million from those two reserve funds. Where does that put us as far as getting under 3%? What percentage would we be at? Right, you know, with the numbers as they currently stand, understanding that they're still going to move.
They're about 2% right now. That would be a 2% tax increase for next year,
okay,
with the recommended use of these monies.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it sounds like a good starting point for discussion and that we can continue to fine tune.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and moving forward to the next slide, just remember, as Mrs. Lofton just pointed out, we're going to continue to look at final projections as a means to that. We're going to look at that as well, how our projection is for the Finance Committee. The continued operations for this year, we do know that we're watching areas of concern. We always have concerns about some line items that we continue to watch, specifically supplies that are not COVID related, procurement of oil and gas and diesel and all of those things. Because remember, when we set those into the budget for this year, they were based upon last year's measurements. So as the market fluctuates a little bit, we have some variability that we're tracking. Of course, additional COVID needs and grant opportunities are pluses and minuses that may impact that. And of course, it's subject to change as we continue to move forward. So there will be more of that in the Finance Committee, much more to share from those projections. Moving forward, the next topic is replacement vehicles. The Safety and Operations Committee has been tracking the need for replacement vehicles. And so we have highlighted 3 vehicles that we are removing. They will not pass inspection, or the value of repair specific to the safety, the Ford Escape, the safety vehicle, the value of the repair is not worth the car. So those are 3 particular vehicles that we've been tracking that we need to replace. The 2 trucks will not pass inspection. An additional vehicle to that will be a Gator that also, while it does not pass inspection, it has no floor. The Gator is used as part of a snow plowing, as part of our snow package. Unfortunately, over the years, the salt has eaten away the flooring. The frame can no longer be saved. And Mr. Clemmer and his operations crew have done everything that they possibly can, but they cannot save that Gator. So we do need a 4th vehicle to move forward with. The Safety and Operations Committee is fine with those vehicles. However, there is a question about funding and lease versus purchase. So Dr. Russell, if you would move forward. Looking at the dollar figures that we have from CoStar's purchases of each of these 4 vehicles, it looks like right now this would be the setup. So we either pay cash, one-time cash of about $146,477, almost $147,000, and a one-time out of unassigned fund balance this year, or set it into next year as an increase in the budget, versus a 3-year and a 4-year lease option. The Safety and Operations Committee said, hey, Jim, why don't you go through some processes so that we can help identify which is the best utilization of our current monies. There are pros and cons. Obviously, if we were to purchase these and put them into next year's budget, right now I have $50,000 already added in to the budget for 21-22. So I would need to recognize about another $100,000 adder to the budget as it currently stands, if we were to pay it a one-time cost. However, as was pointed out in the Safety and Operations Committee, once it's in the budget, it is in there moving forward. Something to consider. Our approach in the business office and administratively and honestly from the school board perspective has been to stretch our dollars as far as we can and utilize a lease associated with that. This would be a municipal lease. And that municipal lease with those rates as quoted there, we've been working with our partner TD Bank. They seem to have the best rates for us. Looking at that cost benefit analysis, obviously it saves us in our budget years over the next several years, but that lease expense is then set for 3 or 4 years. And so the option of that versus the cost savings would be that over the cost of 3 or 4 years, there is a cost to borrow someone else's money to do that. Over 3 years would be $9,349 at the current rate. And over 4 years, it would be $12,282. The big advantage of the municipal lease that's set up is at the end of the lease, we have a $1 buyout. That is the only real big difference as opposed to an individual lease that we all have or may have for our own cars and vehicles, is that we have that huge buyout at the end of a lease. In a municipal lease, it's $1. So we are looking at that as a positive and have looked at that process really as a way to offset the increased costs over those 3 or 4 years. So for essentially what it comes down to for us is we can stretch our tax dollars by doing a 3 or 4 year, and it costs a little more. However, that will work itself into a permanent budgetary item moving forward for the years of those leases. The additional part of this is that we do help to reduce the potential costs for next year's budget. So instead of a $150,000 line item because we purchase it next year, we have a lease that fits a little bit more readily and easily into our budgetary numbers as presented March 8th. We have historically utilized this approach for our many of our technology items over the years. And in fact, over the years had ourselves quite a 4-year cycle, so to speak, of technology leases that were put on, taken off, and backfilled with additional leases to keep the technology going every 4 or 5 years in a cycle. That has worked extremely successful for us. And so administratively, we would like to recommend a 4-year lease. Dr. Russell, if you would advance one slide, please. So it's open to conversation at the board level. Again, the Safety and Operations Committee recommends the purchases of the trucks. They would just like a little bit more detail as far as if you feel comfortable with the administration recommendation for a 4-year lease to extend that based upon these items that I have here listed. Mrs. Lofton.
So, Mr. Weaver, one of the questions that we had come up with, as you had mentioned, we talked about having a replacement cycle for our vehicles. And can you go back to the slide that lists all the vehicles? So, you know, as I'm looking through this list, I'm seeing other vehicles from number 1's 1995, number 6 is 1996, yes, number 13 is 1997. Like, a lot of these vehicles are pretty old. And so, you know, I think the question around having that 10-year plan put together, and why we were asking to have a 10-year plan put together, was that so we could look at what's our budgetary needs going to be each year. Because are we going to be replacing 3 cars or vehicles next year, and another 3 vehicles the year after that, and another 3 vehicles the year after that, in which case we are going to be putting that roughly $150,000 figure into the budget. We'll be phasing it in over a couple of years, but then we have a savings if we purchase it outright as opposed to doing it through the lease. So that's, I think, where that question comes up.
Mrs. Laughlin, that's a great question. And the next slide that I was going to hit upon was the development of that. We don't have anything to offer up tonight, but we do know we've got to do that. And I was planning on bringing that plan, multi-year plan, to the Safety and Operations Committee late in April as part of that conversation.
Right. Because if we're going to be, you know, in 3 years from now, be spending $150,000 a year in our budget each year as we look through replacing many of these very old vehicles that we have, does it make more sense to just bite the bullet and experience the savings that we would be getting on the interest?
Mm-hmm. That's a very fair evaluation.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Hallis.
Yeah, that was the same thing. I think it's important for the board to understand. The reason we brought this question up was, you know, what would be cheaper? And I'd like to see the actual hard number analysis of, do we buy these outright, or do we actually lease them and pay them off over time? And the question I have is sort of what Mrs. Lofton just pointed out. We could end up next year having to buy 3 more vehicles. And is it more beneficial for us to just bite the bullet and buy some of these outright? Because, you know, we'll have, if we instead lease it, we'll have the lease payments from this year. And then next year we could have 2, 3 more lease payments stacked on top. And, you know, what's the benefit financially of doing or not doing, you know, one of those things, whether it's buy outright or, you know, do the lease option and pay it off over a number of years. That was why the committee brought this to the board. So if we can see some hard numbers on that, I think that would be very, very helpful, because I thought it was important because, you know, we know on the Safety and Operations Committee, we saw this, we kind of got thrown off track by a year because we had to buy the box truck. And then all of a sudden we're having to look at buying 3 vehicles and a Gator this year. And I also just want, you know, the full board to understand, and really the general public, you know, the district's not going on kind of a willy-nilly buying spree. We've got some vehicles that if they don't need to be replaced now, they're going to need to be replaced in the next few years. So the better financial plan we have, I think, the better it serves the district in the long run. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hallison. Yes, I do agree. I know that Mr. Clemmer immediately is looking at those that are not of this 21st century yet as good places to start. It is a compliment to the way that his staff over the years have taken care of those vehicles, but I do agree that we need to address that. Dr. Weston.
I'm just wondering why we are looking at purchasing new vehicles rather than sound used vehicle.
So I think part of that conversation is that we have utilized used vehicles. We have utilized colleagues and peers, township, Perkiomen Township over the years, and they have mostly worked out. However, we do have some vehicles where we can get them used. They're a little beaten up and we have a heavy snow or something like that. And then what happens is we have to add additional dollars to them over what we've done in the past, but we can certainly look at that. Getting them brand new with a warranty certainly is a benefit, and there's a value to that benefit rather than getting someone else's potential used junk, so to speak. You always take that chance when you buy a used vehicle. That's all. And we have utilized that, Dr. Weston, in the past to great success. Mr. Dorr.
Mr. Weaver, can we have Mr. Clemmer come to the next safety and operations meeting and give us an update on the state of our fleet?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Mrs. Lofton.
If I can ask a question to follow on to what Dr. Weston asked. So we're purchasing these through, are these CoStars that we're purchasing them?
Yes.
Are we able to get CoStars pricing on used vehicles?
So that I would have to check out. I don't know that answer.
Okay, because, you know, I'm wondering, as the district, we're able to get better rates than the average consumer could because we're able to go through the CoStars pricing, and I'm wondering if that would offset the potential savings that could be generated through a used vehicle purchase. So I'm just wondering if those discounts are available in that market.
Right. Before I speak, I just want to make sure.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Thanks.
That's a good question, though. They're all good questions, and I appreciate them. Thank you. So, Dr. Russell, moving forward, again, you know, we'll hit this up in the Safety and Operations Committee with the fleet review, the condition of the fleet, some of those other options that we talked about, and I'll make sure. A couple of other things just to mention to the school board. We are working on extensions for our current security contract through APC. We've begun that process, and our athletic trainer as well, ATC, Dr. Labernakis, has been around for quite a while, and we're working on an extension with him, and plan to bring those forward when we kind of finalize where we're at with those. And just a note, we are beginning positive work with the YMCA to look into rental contracts before and after school program, daycare, almost back to normal for our 21-22 school year. So just letting the board know that hopefully some of those things are coming back around, and you'll see those in the next couple of months. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Moving on to section 5.02, it's grants and donations. We have two donations, one in the amount of $500 to the district for N95 masks, the other $300 for Middle School East to observe birds and nature and natural habit. Okay, moving on, 5.03. There'd be a motion to approve the list of holidays for 12-month administrative and support staff for the 2021-2022 fiscal year as listed. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, can we please move that to consent? 5.04. There'd be a motion to approve the 2020-2021 school board meeting dates as listed. Shouldn't this be 2021-2022? Okay. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Up, Mrs. Evans Brockett.
Thank you, Mr. Dora. I had sent an email to the board suggesting that we move our meeting time back to 7 o'clock. Years ago, these meetings started at 7:30 and then they were shifted to 6:30. And I just think it can be difficult at times with dinners and sports pickups and that type of thing to get here at 6:30 for us and for the general public. So I'm wondering if there would be any support for moving the meetings to 7.
I can just speak for myself. It would be helpful for me.
I would support that too, and it would be very helpful.
I'll jump in. I'm fine with it as well.
Yeah, I have no objection.
I have no objection.
I don't have an objection to moving the time back to 7, but I would then ask that there be continuity between all meetings, including committee meetings that are not board-led, just so there's a consistent time frame allowed.
So if I can jump on that, I like having a 7 o'clock start time if we're going to have executive session before the meeting starting at 6. I think sometimes, my only concern is that for those of us who do get up early, when meetings start running till 10 o'clock or 11, if we get into 10 or 11 o'clock meetings, that does wind up getting late. So, I don't have a problem being here at either time, but I like having the executive sessions beforehand. In which case, I think the 6:30 start time for commit, to me, it's more of a challenge to be here at 5:30. But then I don't have a challenge with 6:30 start times for committees. But if other people are having that challenge, then I don't have really strong feelings about it.
So do we need a separate motion for that as opposed to this being just the schedule?
Well, Dr. Kolar has her hand raised.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to add what Mrs. Lofton said. My issue was with the executive session because we've tended to have those prior to the meeting. And I think in an effort to not be here till midnight. So if we were to stick to the 6:30, it's very difficult for me to get here by 5:30 for executive session. So I see that as a big advantage that I could be here by 6. If we don't move it, then I think we have to go back to executive session being after the meeting.
I think if you just have a directive, it seems like there's a consensus for the 7 o'clock start time, just direct the administration to amend the agenda accordingly for next week.
Okay.
It is actually in that gray bar. It says 6:30.
So yeah, they would need to amend it.
Okay.
Okay. So if amended, can we move it to consent? Yeah.
So if I may, Mr. Dorr, we will amend this. And then if I'm hearing the board correctly, or at least some comments, is it the preference of the board to shift all meetings to 7 o'clock then? That consistency? Have we appreciated that? No? Okay. So how do we feel about committee meetings continuing? Right now they're scheduled at 6:30 for the rest of the school year. Again, we wanted to be consistent with board meetings. If we shift the board meetings to 7, where would you like to land there?
Perhaps we can ask board members to email you with their preference for that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and just so I'm clear, the proposed change to 7 o'clock is for next school year. Correct?
That's my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, once updated, if we can move that to consent, please. 5.05, There'd be a motion to approve the 2021-2022 North Monco Technical Career Center budget. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, can we please move to consent? 5.06, be a motion to approve the resolution authorizing North Monco Technical Career Center to issue the school lease revenue note series of 2021 issued to refund the school lease revenues bonds series of 2015 as reviewed and provided by the solicitor. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, if we can move that to consent, please. 5.07, motion to approve an intent to award a guaranteed energy savings contract, ESCO 4.0, to CM3 Building Solutions, Inc., with a total project cost exclusive of financing costs not to exceed $6 million, contingent upon finalization of the contract documents by the district administrator and solicitor, securement of the necessary financer from the guaranteed energy savings contract, and the provision of all required bonds, insurances, and guarantees by CM3. Any questions?
Could I request that the wording of that be modified to a motion to approve an award of a guaranteed energy savings contract, not the intent? We previously approved the intent. We've advertised this appropriately so we can actually award it subject to the stated contingencies.
Okay, can we move it to consent with that
Sure.
being added? Okay. Any questions prior? All right, not seeing any. If you can amend that, we'll move it to consent, please. 5.08, we have a motion to approve S.J. Thomas Company, Inc. to review and design the safety vestibule at the administration building under KPN contract number KPN-201801J0CC-26 at a cost not to exceed $38,052 as recommended by Safety and Operations Committee. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, can you please move that to consent? 5.09, be a motion to approve GKO Architects to review the snow guard related roof revisions at the high school at a cost not to exceed $6,500 as recommended by the Safety and Operations Committee. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, if you could move to consent, please. 5.10, there will be a motion to approve S.J. Thomas Company, Inc., KPN number 201-801J0CC-30 at a cost not to exceed $172,591 for the South Elementary Asphalt Project that will coincide with the playground project as recommended by the Safety and Operations Committee. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, if you can move to consent, please. 5.11, there will be a motion to approve a contract with STA for transportation services effective July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2028, as recommended by Safety and Operations Committee, subject to finalization of contract language by district administrator and solicitor. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, if we can move to consent, please. 5.12, be a motion to approve purchase of one John Deere Gator XUV 865R, model year 2019, from Little's John Deere at a cost not to exceed $24,225 through CoStars, as recommended by the Safety and Operations Committee. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, if we can move that to consent, please. 5.13, motion to approve the purchase of two 2021 Ford F-350 trucks with snowplow packages from New Holland Auto Group at a cost not to exceed $89,540 through CoStars as recommended by the Safety and Operations Committee. Any questions?
Just like to comment, Jim proposed a capital lease financing for these. You're committing to the purchase. We're leaving the financing undetermined at this point. So I think the intent of the administration would be to bring back a financing proposal, and in particular, a capital finance or municipal lease proposal for further board approval.
So we should leave this off consent for now.
Well, it can be left on consent. We're not going to have that financing proposal for next week. Jim, I believe you're looking for a commitment to purchase these. It will either be, but I just want you to be aware that the district administration may be coming back with a municipal lease proposal to finance the purchase. Otherwise, you're going to be paying it through present capital funds.
So the purpose for this is because of the fact that we've had such an issue with vendors on CoStars in general to get trucks. We have been told that if we don't get our placement in order, just like the Chromebooks, that some truck makes and models will not be available until December because of the technology chips that are in them are being delayed. These purchases are just moving forward with the commitment that we're going to go forward with it so we can start that process. Ultimately, the financing, whether it's paid in cash or pay it through a municipal lease, we can get that underway after further investigation on a committee and school board level.
And any municipal lease would require further board approval.
Okay. Mrs. Kohler or Dr. Kohler?
I was just going to ask that if we would be voting on that at a future time. So it's been answered. Thank you.
Yes. And actually, that's a good question, Dr. Kohler. We actually did this in 2019 when we purchased 2 trucks and the box truck. The box truck purchase actually slowed us down. So we approved those 3 vehicles in June of 2019, but did not do the financing until October. So we do have precedent in doing that.
Okay. If you'll move that to consent, please. 5.14 is a placeholder. 5.15, there'll be a motion to approve a floor scrubber from MJ Earl Inc. at a CoStars cost not to exceed $6,595 as recommended by the Safety and Operations Committee. Any questions? Mrs. Lofton?
I have a question just going back to the vehicle. So I assume that the safety vehicle that was the Chevy Colorado vehicle, I believe. And then you also said there was going to be a Gator. So are we going to see a 4th vehicle on the agenda next week? Or where is that 4th vehicle in the list of approvals that's being presented?
Yeah, so that's a good, well, yeah, a good question. So the John Deere Gator is at 5.12. The 2 trucks are 5.13.
Okay. Oh, yes. Thank you. All right.
And again, the only reason that the 5.14, the safety vehicles in here is because we're still working out details we had to go to several different CoStars vendors because they couldn't give us the truck that we wanted. So we're still working on that.
Okay. Is that due to they don't contract it, or the production problems are impacting the ability of to get the trucks we need?
Yes, it's the production.
Okay.
Yeah, some of our local go-to vehicle places, especially around here, have pretty much said that they cannot get one before January of next year.
So I'm just curious whether that might impact the order in which we replace our vehicles, and whether there is another way to meet the needs of that vehicle with something else, and perhaps we bring one of the other vehicles that is getting close to needing replacement forward. I'm just curious.
Yes, we have. We can utilize the trucks, a different truck now that the snow has stopped. We can take the snowplow off of it, and it becomes a much more viable option. We've also looked into the student driver's ed car, perhaps utilizing that as well at times.
Oh, well, that's actually could potentially be a really efficient way to better use that, because if we're not going to have the car till January, it sounds like we might want to again take a step back on that one and look at what all the options are.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so can we move 5.15 to consent, please? Okay. Moving on to 5.16. The motion to approve KEBO Sites website consultant at a cost of $11,000 to assist in the design and transition of content for the district's new platform. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, can we move that to consent, please? 5.17, it will be happening on April 12th, and that ends my section.
Thank you, Mr. Dorr. That takes us on to section 6 and payment of bills. Dr. Weston.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. Item 6.01, the ratification of bills and payroll and the authorization of payments. And item 6.02, the approval of the treasurer's report and financial statements. Both of these items will be presented for the board's consideration on April 12th. And that concludes section 6.
Nice and quick. I like it, Dr. Weston. That takes us to section 7 and professional personnel. Ms.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. Items 7.01, 7.02, 7.03, 7.04, and 7.05, 7.06, 7.07 are all on consent. .08 is a motion to approve the creation of 2 additional special education positions at the secondary level. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we can move that to consent, please. 7.09 is a motion to approve the creation of board certified behavioral analyst position district-wide. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we can move that to consent. 7.1, approval to create an instructional coach position. The motion is to approve the creation of the instructional coach position district-wide. Are there any questions? Seeing none, please move that to consent. And 7.11 is the approval to create 2 elementary health and wellness positions. Motion to approve the creation of 2 elementary health and wellness positions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, please move that to consent. And that ends my section.
Thank you, Ms. White. We're in a groove now. Let's keep it going. Mrs. Roberts with section 8 on support personnel.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. 8.01, 8.02, 8.03, 8.04, 8.05, and 8.06 are all on consent. 8.07 is an approval to create the new information technology specialist position as part of the supervisors and confidential secretaries and registered nurses agreement. Are there any questions? Seeing none, let's move that to consent as well. And that concludes section 8.
Thank you, Mrs. Roberts. And section 9, governance, Mrs. Mayers, please.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. The following policies are presented for a first reading. 137.1, extracurricular participation by home education students. 150, Title I, comparability of services. 810.1, drug alcohol testing, covered drivers. 810.3, school vehicle drivers. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, hold on. Thank you. Section or number 9.02, approval to hold a second reading and adopt policies. Motion to adopt the following policies: 113.3 and 903, screening and evaluation for students with disabilities, public participation in board meetings. Are there any questions? Seeing none, can we please move that to consent? Section 9.03, the motion to approve Mrs. Sarah Evans-Brockett to be Perkiomen Valley School District's representative to the MCIU Board of Directors to finish Dr. Hallis's term through June 30th, 2021. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, can we move that to consent, please? Section 9.04, approval. The motion is to approve Mrs. Sarah Evans Brockett to be Perkiomen Valley School District's representative to the MCIU Board of Directors for a 3-year term effective July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2024. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, can we move that to consent, please? Hold on, it's glitching. Here we go. Motion to approve to adopt the attached resolution declaring May 20th, 21 as Student Loan Month. Are there any comments or questions? Seeing none, can we move that to consent, please? 9.06 is not there. 9.07 is the motion to approve an anti-Asian hate statement as presented. Do we have any comments or questions? So I actually have just a thought or discussion point. I totally support the statement, but I'm wondering, as a board, as we move forward, there's just going to continue to be difficult circumstances or that arise, or are we as the board really feeling it necessary to call out each circumstance that arises in our communities, in our at-large communities? I'm just wondering what the board thinks about that. I'm not saying that I don't support the statement, but I'm wondering, as life continues on, unfortunately, are we going to put out statements on a continual basis, where I personally think that we have a good general statement out there, and as a board, I'm thankful to work with my colleagues who all are very supportive of inclusive, all means all, everybody needs, and to have access to a safe environment and a proper education, regardless of how they might be different or their life circumstances. So I was just curious about if anybody had any comments or thoughts about that.
So Mrs. Roberts raised her hand first.
Yeah, this is not without precedent. We have done this before in situations addressing various and sundry concerns in the news as pertains to our school district, and basically taking a stand in regard to what our position is on that particular incident or circumstance. So I don't see this as being particularly problematic. I think that it's important to include it on the record along with the rest of our statements in regards to those sundry other situations. This is an increasingly difficult situation, and I think particularly relevant to our school district, considering the information that we've received from parents and other community members in the course of the last week or so as regards anti-Asian hate as it pertains to our particular school district. So I don't have a problem whatsoever in including this in the record as to where we stand, where this is concerned, just as we've done previously. And I hope that we can continue to make further actions on the basis of this statement. It's nice to make a statement, but I hope that we back up this statement with actions as well. And I'm hoping to see something specifically targeted towards our Asian American, Pacific Islander students to make sure that their needs are addressed as well as the rest of the minorities students that we have, whether it be racial or ethnic or sexual orientation or transgender. I don't think that it's inappropriate for us to make a statement considering the light of the news in the last few weeks.
Mrs. Lofton.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. So I agree with everything that Mrs. Roberts just said, that given the current events, it's worthwhile to make a statement. And I completely support everything that is listed here in this statement. But I was pulling up the statement that we approved in June to address issues of issues surrounding diversity and discrimination. And in that statement, we said, we call upon our administration to strictly uphold district policies on non-discrimination, number 103, and on diversity, number 151. We also say, we reaffirm our commitment to providing a safe and secure learning environment for all students that's governed by principles of equality, justice, and humanity, and a respect for the inherent dignity and worth of all people. So I think, we have emphasized that on a broader level. And I guess in reflecting on this and reflecting on our statements that we're putting out, it's just concerning to receive emails or have discussions with students who have come to policy committee and hear that they are continuing to have negative experiences based on who they are. And so I think that we need to really be very thoughtful in all of our efforts on ensuring that every single student is treated with dignity and respect. And, I'm in full support of this statement, but I do think it's important that we consider all groups who have been discriminated against or marginalized. And, we've heard from a lot of those groups in this past year. And I think that we just really need to continue in our efforts to say that that kind of behavior is absolutely unacceptable.
Dr. Howell.
Yeah, I'll take the longer run. The civil rights movement didn't begin in the 1960s. It began before 1776, and it's 2021, and we are still asking many of the same questions. So I would hope that this board, when incidents arise, would come forward again and again and again and again and confront those issues, period. Exclamation point. It is what it is, and let's not pretend otherwise. And yeah, we made a general statement before. And as we can tell, some folks ain't listening. So let's make it again in a variety of ways, whatever it takes. Thank you.
Dr. Weston.
Yeah, I really don't have much to add except to express my agreement with what the previous speakers have said. It's distressing that we still have to make these statements, but as these incidents are occurring distressingly often, I think it's important that we reaffirm our commitment to equity and equal treatment and respectful treatment of all members of our community at every opportunity, and to reaffirm our commitment to trying to address these things in the community and making sure that at least within our community, things like this do not continue to happen. These events that we've been hearing from parents and members of the community do not continue to happen going forward. It's just it's too much. It needs to be addressed, and I think statements like this are just essential to make as these things happen, and we have to commit to making our own community a safer and more inclusive place.
I actually have question. I mean, I'm in agreement with that, and I know we have policies, but sorry, what? You can't? I don't know. I'm not on mute. Can you hear me now? No? Yes? You know, let me turn sorry, I think I was turned down too low. My question is, and I do know that we have policy, but maybe we can state it publicly for those members in our community who might be listening right now, because in some of the emails that we've received, parents didn't share their information, and I think that's part of the issue, that if the harm that's happening to students isn't shared and doesn't go anywhere, then we as a district can't know about it or act on it. So maybe Dr. Russell, could you speak for a minute about how best parents who are their students feel that they're experiencing racism or something like that? What's the best way for them to have that addressed so that they feel comfortable, so we can do something about it?
Thank you, Mrs. Mares. I think I would recommend that if there are concerns around the experiences of our students, that counselors are reached out to first. If a student has a strong connection with a trusted adult, that's also a very good individual for a parent to reach out to. That may be a teacher, that may be a coach. And if there is not the outcome that needs to be obtained or happen for those students, then an administrator should be contacted and the situation should be discussed. And hopefully that helps.
And I would just note that as required under law, the district maintains and publishes a formal complaint process under its non-discrimination policy, so that if anybody experiences discriminatory action, that there is a formal complaint process that they can avail themselves of.
And we do have under the resources here, the Safe to Say tip line and several links to articles. And these articles are not just for people of Asia that are Asian American, but these are how to talk to your kids about racism. So I encourage everyone to look at those, and perhaps we can also add the link to the policy at the bottom of this too, so that people know the correct way of reporting. And Dr. Kolar, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Dr. Russell, if you could just scroll up to the statement again. I know you scrolled down so we could see the resources. Just to follow up on one of the comments, if we don't know things are happening, we, can't always address them. And it specifically says in this statement, we encourage any student or family in our PV community who feels victimized to reach out for support, and we welcome any suggestions for how to better support our Asian American students. And I actually asked Mrs. Evans-Brockett to put that sentence in there because I agree, we need to hear from families. Unfortunately, I have heard from a lot of families in the past couple weeks, and being an Asian American on the board, I think maybe they felt comfortable reaching out to me, and I've had a lot of back and forth with the community saying they don't feel comfortable coming forward. So I really wanted to put that in the statement, and I hope that as a board we can agree on putting this out there. I think our community needs to hear it, and our community needs to feel supported right now.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
We have Miss White has her hand raised.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I want to echo really all of that in the fact that the appropriateness of us as leaders for the entire community is that we hold the responsibility to make sure that the policies protecting our students as a public school entity are being upheld. And if our families don't feel as though they can come forward for fear of, retaliation or retribution or further discrimination, that's obviously a huge problem for a public school community. So I feel like it is of the utmost importance that every single instance of this type of discrimination and hate that's happening on a national and a global scale happens, we have to take care of the community within our walls and our families within our walls, and let them know that they do have allies within their community and that they have a safe place to be able to find refuge and to find confidence and support, that they can, in good faith, send their children into school and know that they will be defended and protected to the greatest ability of the school system. So if there is ever a instance to call out and name that discrimination or hate, we should take it, and we should take it with a firm and kind of an unequivocal stand. Part of this whole acknowledgement is recognizing that discrimination and hate is present within our community. And also, obviously we're a microcosm of the nation and the world itself, but without naming and recognizing the fact that it does exist, unfortunately, we can't start to combat it. So at every turn, we need to put a label on it, call it out, and prevent it from happening further. That's all.
Mrs. Roberts, did you have another comment?
I do. I think that it's important to understand why it's important to put something on the record. There's a difference between knowing that something is wrong or something is going wrong and recognizing that we have to do something about it. But the power of putting our names to this statement puts it on the record. It puts it onto our permanent record as part of our archive as to what we intend to do about this. There's power in making it part of the record, and I think that it's important that we do that. That's all.
Okay, thank you for the discussion. So the motion is to approve an anti-Asian hate statement as presented. And I so move.
Second, Wade.
We have a motion and a second. I believe we've discussed this thoroughly. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mrs. Mayers. And I want to quickly state, we received some emails. I know it was disappointing that it's taken a while for us to get this statement out, but it is procedure that we vote on it as a board. And this was our first board meeting since the incidents in Atlanta had happened. So just want to explain that that's the reasoning. But on to section 10, closing items. 10.01, comments are accepted from the audience. Again, you can raise your hand in the Zoom room and state your name and your municipality, and you have 3 minutes. I am not seeing any hands raised. Oh, now we have one. Mr. Ganesh.
Mr. Liggett.
Thank you, Mr. Ganesh. Just wanted to say I appreciate that the board discussed as well as passed the motion about the anti-hate against the Asians. And while I understand Mrs. Mayer's concern about we're voting again to say that we, don't like this, it's important. It's a statement as a community that we're paying attention to the current events and we don't like it. I understand that action is the most important thing that we must do on this. And therefore, every time that we state that inclusion and equity are important, it sets the mindset, it sets the community up to know that these things are not acceptable to us. And I appreciate that the board was able to come together and do that tonight. And I hope we, unfortunately, continue to support those that have these kinds of incidents happen. I really don't want these incidents to continue, but the fact that we can take a stand is a good thing. And this way, the community will know these kinds of things are not acceptable to us. Thank you.
I'm seeing no other hands raised. So that will take us on to item 10.02 and comments from board members. Are there any board members who'd like to make a comment at this time? Dr. Russell?
Thank you, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. So I just wanted to call attention to the board as well as the public that next week, as we again continue inviting individuals to attend board meetings on site, in working with Mr. Ganesh, we would like to eliminate the Zoom room next week, presuming that works for our board, and live stream the meeting via YouTube. Eliminating the Zoom room eliminates some of the audio challenges for some individuals who attend. And at this point, the recommendation is that if individuals would like to make comments, they can do so in person here in the high school cafeteria or via email sent to our board secretary via that email address, virtual board meetings at pvsd.org before 6 p.m. on the night of a meeting, and they will be posted for the public.
Thank you, Dr. Russell. Dr. Weston.
Yeah, this was circulated via email over the weekend, and I responded to that, and I'll say publicly now that I really strongly object to the elimination of the Zoom room as a way for the public to attend and comment on the meetings. If there's any kind of silver lining of the events of the last year, I think it's been in our increased ability and improved ability to conduct meetings virtually and have virtual participation. Before the pandemic, we would meet in the library and we would maybe have a handful of people come out to listen to the board meeting and to offer their comments. Now we can have, we've had meetings where we've had hundreds of representatives of the community come and offer and listen to what we do and see what we do and offer their comments on what we do. And I think that's very important to be able to continue that community involvement and get the feedback as it's ongoing. I understand the some of the technical challenges. I think we've found ways to overcome those and to deal with those. I understand that there have been some incidents or some occasions where people have, not necessarily behaved by the rules, and been somewhat inappropriate in the comments that they've offered. I think that's just one of the things that we have to deal with in a public meeting, in a democracy where we listen to the people in the community that we serve and represent. If people really get inappropriate in their comments, we do have the power of the microphone to deal with that, to address any truly inappropriate actions that are taking place. So I would like to see the Zoom room continue for as long as we are still in a pandemic situation, and we still are in a pandemic situation where people may not be comfortable with coming out and seeing us in public. Cases are still on the rise in Montgomery County. People may not be comfortable coming out and seeing us in person, offering their comments in person. We can still listen to them through the Zoom room, and they can still participate in the meetings through the Zoom room. So that's my thought on excuse me, on proceeding. Thank you.
Mrs. Roberts.
Yeah, I just have a question. I am very much looking forward to being completely and fully vaccinated. I have had my second vaccination, but I will not be past my 2 weeks past by next week's meeting. That being the case, if we eliminate the Zoom room and we choose to participate virtually, how would we be able to do that via live stream?
I'll let Mr. Ganesh answer this more fully, but in previous times we had board members call in if they were not able to be here in person and needed to participate via phone or virtually. But I think Mr. Ganesh has some ideas how to make that.
I was going to offer the same method. You can either call in. That's the only way to actively participate in a meeting. If Zoom is not present, and the live streaming is only through YouTube, you really miss out on the participation aspect of it. You're only able to see the meeting, hear the meeting, but not able to participate. So the only way to participate is to call into the meeting.
So that being the case, if we would be calling into the meeting, would we? I mean, because I've done that before. I was ill one time and I called into the meeting and I wasn't able to be heard by the other people who were participating. Is that going to be an issue? I mean, I know that Dr. Russell just mentioned the technical difficulties sometimes of the Zoom room, but I'm wondering if the telephone isn't even a worse suggestion.
Well, I think we'll work out some things in the next week and make sure that you're able to be heard and you can hear everyone else. That is part of policy, that accommodation be made.
Okay, because I really would like to be able to hear and participate no matter where I am. And I will be there in May. So, I mean, it would just be for the one meeting. But I just want to make sure that the participation is available for people who should choose to not attend in the Zoom room. I tend to agree with Dr. Weston that I think that it's been advantageous for us to have many, many more community members participate in the meetings via Zoom when they may not be able to make childcare accommodations or such in order to participate in person. So I've been very heartened by the idea of having so many people in the Zoom room in order to participate. So, I mean, I guess there are advantages to both, but at the same time, I really think that having the Zoom room to fall back on is not a bad idea.
Mrs. Mayer.
Thank you. I actually also agree with Dr. Weston. As horrible as this pandemic has been and continues to be, it has afforded our community that we represent an opportunity to more easily engage. And I mean, Mrs. Roberts is right. Or if you're working, you have childcare issues, maybe, anyway, all kinds of issues. I think that if it's not the Zoom room, that we as a district need to look at how to continue to make our meetings accessible for all of those who want to participate.
Mrs. Lofton.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans-Rocket. So first, I'm really grateful to be back in the building, seeing all of the faces of many of us. And those of you who we're still seeing through the Zoom room, I can't wait to have you back in person too. That said, I would agree that there is great value in keeping the Zoom room. And especially if we have board members who aren't going to be comfortable attending in person in May, I'm not sure that it's of value to eliminate it prior to when they are fully fully post-vaccination. So I would advise that we at least keep the Zoom room as an option through the end of April. And then I'm really not sure whether eliminating virtual options for engagement is of value. I think it does provide a window into operations. And I've heard from community members that they really appreciate having had the opportunity to understand what it is that we do as a board, and that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So, I don't know if there are other ways that we can address the sort of hybrid model with technology. If there are other options that we can implement so that we can be more, I'm not sure what the word is, but the word agile is coming to mind, so that we can participate seamlessly regardless of where we are. And then my other question is, how are we going to be handling our committee meetings moving forward? I know there were a couple of committee meetings that had an in-person option. Is that something that we're also going to be moving to having all of our committee meetings in person, or what's the plan for all of that moving forward?
Dr. Russell and I did talk about that last week. And as far as board committees, our committees are finance and policy. And the feedback has been that continuing to do them via Zoom seems to work well for everyone. And I believe Dr. Russell has stated the same for the district committees. Just because of the number of people to be able to do it in a hybrid manner, getting everyone computers and microphones and everything would just be too much at this point.
So the way that the finance committee was run as a hybrid with some people on site and some people virtual, you're not going to be moving any of the committees into an in-person format? And I'm just curious, like, what is that, just indefinitely everything, all the committees are just going to be Zoom rooms, or what's the vision for how that might return to some sort of an in-person?
For the immediate future, they will be strictly via Zoom. The discussion was that the amount of work that goes into doing a hybrid meeting really is not worth the outcome at this point for those committee meetings. But certainly if people feel differently, then please email Dr. Russell and I, and we can continue that conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. White.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. Just regards to, the committee meetings being in person, I don't know how everybody else feels about, or how often, if they go to every committee meeting or not, if they only go to their own committee meetings. But with regards to the intimacy of, for lack of a better word, committee meetings, this type of setup is hardly conducive to collaboration amongst a committee, in my opinion. To be honest with you, I don't really have a problem being on site, but part of the push to get on site for these board meetings is to have public participation, and there is zero here from the public tonight, which is fine because there's usually not a whole huge turnout in person for the school board meetings. But for committee meetings where things really get discussed and work really, kind of gets done, I think that there's something to be said about being able to sit in a more relaxed, fluid environment. And unfortunately, until we're in a post-pandemic world, we're really not able to do that in person. So to sit with a mask on, distance, 20 feet away from half of you, I just don't see a lot of collaboration or productive work happening. I think, honestly, in person is more of a distraction during a committee meeting. So I don't know how everybody else feels about specific committee meetings. I just know that this past year, committee meetings actually have been super productive, I think, in terms of communication and organization. So that's my 2 cents about committee meetings. But with regards to the public meetings for the board meeting, I think that in person, since it is a public meeting, it should be provided, and that's fine. The majority of us will continue to show up for that. But again, in terms of off-site participation of community members, if there should be such a desire to participate with public comment, I think that can certainly happen in person, or otherwise, with a statement, should they not be able to attend a particular meeting.
I am not seeing any other board members with their hands raised. So before we adjourn, I will just announce that we had an executive session prior to tonight's board meeting to discuss real estate and personnel. And with that, we are adjourned. Thanks everyone for coming.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks. Good night.